Hi guys, just checking that the live is actually working. Hopefully we can Hi everybody that's joined. We're just about to start in a few moments. Hi Katie. Hi. Okay, we're
Hello.
live. Amazing. Always a bit of suspense with technology these days.
It's the first time I've done it, so I was a bit nervous.
Is it
I've
really?
managed to
Well,
figure it out. I tried to join 3 times and it said no, you can't do it. So
okay, well, we're on, and I'm really honored that your first live is with me tonight. So I'm really
yeah.
excited to talk about the launch of your blog, Let's Eat Meat. Of course, I was sold as soon as I read the title. And I really want to introduce it to the audience tonight and talk a little bit about your path into this carnivore lifestyle and what really made you turn into an absolute carnivore.
Well, well, just going back, I've mostly always been quite active, and therefore paid attention to my diet. And I think it's mostly historically been a sort of whole foods diet. And back when I started to get into nutrition, back when I was like 16, 17, I kind of stumbled upon in the early days of YouTube, people like, what's his name, like Sean Croxton, and he was talking about like just eat real food. Um, and so there was just basically whole food. And then that basically took me down a path of kind of getting into sort of ancestral nutrition. Um, and then through that, I came across Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, who is the author of Gut and Psychology Syndrome,
Mm.
also known as GAPS, hence why you've got the GAPS diet. So this diet quite interested me because it was talking about how nutrition influences the symptoms of autism in children. So I was quite an interesting topic. So I thought I'd read into it, even though I didn't really have any connection to anybody who was autistic. I just thought it was interesting. Um, and basically, a fundamental part of that diet is an elimination diet. And it starts with a 5 day bone broth fast. Well, not fast, but a bone broth diet. And what is this supposed to do? It's just kind of eliminate any kind of potential, I don't know, toxic foods, let's say, and basically like set your, I guess, get your body to a baseline. So it kind of gets rid of any sort of nutritional or extra nutritional stimulus that might be causing sort of physiological issues. Um, and then from there, you slowly reintroduce foods. It can even be to the extent of where, say, for example, you wanted to reintroduce bananas. You would rub a banana on the skin, and then you would wait 24 hours and see if you'd have a reaction, and then you would digest it the following 24 hours and then look for symptoms. So this basically early on has been in my mind. And just as I progressed, kind of that out of, I guess around about that same time is when like the paleo movement came about, and then you got like Paleolithic lifestyle, which is often like very low. It was like low carb, was most popular at that time. And then you got the ketogenic, and then that's when you kind of saw like the biohacking and the Dave Asprey, and he kind of came out with like what was a similar like Paleolithic diet with his bulletproof diet. And so I basically delved into those. I was trying those out, seeing how they suited me, how they um, how they suited my fitness goals, etc. And then just as with evolution, out came Sean Baker on like the Joe Rogan podcast and kind of massively popularized the carnivore diet. And it was just one of those like, well, it didn't seem out of the ordinary since I'd like already read like the GAPS diet, and everything he was saying kind of did make sense, but it was the complete elimination of vegetables for the long term. So it was kind of projecting out primal diet as a long term sustainable diet, which I think is really, really gaining efficacy, both I think with the scientific literature and also just anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
So that's kind of And then basically what stimulated me to like really give it a go is just I had my own, I guess, like health issues, not health, just I thought I'd like just give it a go, see how I responded, how did my digestion respond, how did my skin respond, how my energy levels, how's my like psychology, and I just got like massive benefits from it. So I thought, oh wow, it's pretty good. And then, well, I've got all this like knowledge in my head. It was kind of annoying me. I wasn't really doing anything with it. So I thought, well, hey, let's just put, my random thoughts into a blog and maybe hopefully get some people to eat more meat.
Well, I'm really glad you've done that, because I find that your blog is really helpful in terms of stopping this idea that meat is bad. I think we've grown up in that generation where meat was almost the devil. You would have someone eating their Oreo or chips or fries, but pointing their fingers at you for eating a steak, and somehow that would be perceived as unhealthy. And I find that what I love about what you just introduced is really the starting point of, to get any kind of diet going, you have to start by an elimination process. I feel like a lot of people at the moment are completely unaware of where the particular information can be. And by stripping down the food, and particularly the food that can cause toxic reaction or that can make you feel bloated, it's just such a nice way to become more aware of what you eat, and also develop that kind of cause to effect relationship to food. And that's something else that I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you're a big advocate of using a food journal. And so one of the first question I would have is, for everybody listening today and who's wondering, what's the carnivore diet? How would you define it?
So I fundamentally define it in a broad sense. It's just it is predominantly a meat-based diet. Upwards of pretty much 100% of your calories are coming from the consumption of meat, and so that's the protein and the fat that just comes packaged in a steak, for example. And then you would have like the addition of salt and then water if you wanted to keep it super strict. So
my first question to you, and I hear you talk, is what about dairies? Because one of the questions in advance to this talk, when we talk about carnivore, I think there is a lot of confusion as to dairies and whether or not meat-based product derivative can be introduced.
yes, so just going back to your point about keeping a food diary. Now, if you're just wanting, if you're actually wanting, so I'd say use the carnivore diet is basically you want to get yourself a baseline in nutrition. Okay, so say for example, we've been alive, 20 plus years, and we've just eaten what I say standard Western diet. Okay, there's a lot of negatives that can have, like, you can be lucky and have no digestive issues, no autoimmune conditions, nothing. You have perfect digestion, great gut health, gut flora. But say, for example, something goes wrong and starts to go awry. How do you attack this via nutrition? Well, you need to get a baseline. And this is what the carnivore diet is fantastic for, because it gets you to a baseline. So you cut everything out, okay, and then you consume what is just meat, salt, and water, okay? And you do this for a period of time, and this allows your body to sort of reset, find a baseline. It doesn't have any, it's not having like any, be it toxins or any potential irritants that would be causing you any sort of physiological and psychological symptoms. So once we've got that baseline, then we can start adding stuff back in. And then, really, like, for some people might be super sensitive, whereby they just have to stick to meat, water, salt the long term. However, there's others who just have just a better, like, there's not a better, but luck of the draw, they've just got a more robust digestive system at that time. So let's say, for example, we then add from that baseline, we can add it back in eggs, and then you can add in like other sort of like just other types of meat. Say for example, processed meat. So that would be more like like cold cuts of ham, cold cuts of meat, salami, those things, and see how you react to them, unlike bacon, etc. And then from there, we can start to go into dairy. So these are animal derived products that, for example, people do tend to can. For example, like myself, I react to dairy, so I just cut it out completely. But some people do well just drinking milk, and there's a lot of nutrition you can get from milk, and it's the same with cheese. There's a lot of nutrition you can get from cheese, but we have to compare it against something which is your sort of where you stand physiologically, and that's where I think people are getting a lot of benefit from the carnivore diet, is they're stripping that back to a baseline and then they're slowly building it up, because you don't want to be in a very restrictive diet for a long time, because it affects your life. So you want to cut back and then slowly build back in. So hopefully to where you can actually have a broad spectrum of animal-based products in your diet, such as dairy, and even to the point of adding back in carbohydrate sources such as honey or rice or potatoes, and other tubers. And then again, you can kind of test vegetables and spices and see how you feel.
Yes, I personally had an incredible experience going on the carnivore diet, and I come from quite a different background when it comes to eating, because I was vegetarian for perhaps over 15 years, and then following the yogic path, I went into veganism for a few months. It was a massive shift coming from vegetarian to vegan to carnivore. And I have to say the difference was just incredible. My skin, I suffered with really bad skin condition. For years, I had kind of sort of adult acne when I was always conscious and worried. And when I switched to carnivore, or at least flexi carnivore diet, that just was a story from the past. My hair was just growing, my skin quality got better. Another thing that I noticed, because I do love being in the sun, was that as I introduced a carnivore diet, I didn't need to use SPF anymore. And I used to be quite heavy, quite overgenerous on the SPF, which is actually loaded with toxic component. That's perhaps another story for another day. But
it is.
I've noticed that my skin, because it has all these healthy oils and all this collagen, can handle the sun a lot more. And we are meant to be sun exposed, of course, to a reasonable amount, but we get all this vitamin D, and it's just made me feel also able to recover faster after a long run, after a walk, being less prone to injuries, and just generally speaking, I feel like I had a lot less carb craving. And perhaps that is the psychological challenge when you switch into carnivore, let's be honest, is that craving. I mean, I'm French, so I'm not gonna pretend that I didn't miss the bread. I did. So again, for everybody listening, the idea of carnivore is really to stripping back, or to strip away all the carbs from the diet, and to have a diet that is predominantly, if not exclusively, meat-based, where about 70% to 80% of your daily calories intake will be fat. However, and we're going to tap into that, it's not just going to be any fat. We're going to really focus on good, healthy fat, and we're going to talk about the different kind of fat out there. But the reason I mentioned that is, of course, it is hard to let go of the carbs. But then again, when I get this pushback from clients, not wanting to let go of the carbs, it's what do you want? Do you want to choose the healthier version of yourself that is going to have high energy level, or do you want to go into that carb cycle of addiction? Because ultimately, the more sugar you intake, even in the form of carb, the more carb you're going to sort of crave. So I found that going strict carnivore was very useful. I saw it as almost a way to really hack my own metabolism, my appetite, my mood, my sleep. And then, as you mentioned, I slowly reintroduced other food. I'm currently quite flexible. I would say that my diet is primal or paleo, in the sense that it is very much meat, but also egg and fish based. But I do also consume a little bit of leafy vegetables and some berries and a little bit of honey. And I found that, if you think about who we are as a human race and how we evolved, this is really the diet that mimics our ancestor. and our ancestors are the ones that made us who we are today. So, you know, I know there may be some vegetarians or vegans out there feeling kind of emotionally affected by the thought of having a carnivore diet, but the reality is that if our ancestors didn't eat the way that they did, we wouldn't be the humans that we are.
That's exactly true.
I wanted you to really introduce your concept or your idea that I really love about your blog. This kind of philosophical idea behind, you know, veganism, vegetarianism, and carnivore. And I know that you refer to one of my favorite philosophers, Carl Jung, and I would love for you to expand a little bit on that today, if you want to.
Yeah, of course. So it's kind of going, so veganism really can only exist in this modern society. Um, so it's so if you go back historically, there's pretty much for the most of our evolution, our ancestors had to have consumed meat to survive. And really, say veganism today exists through that ancestors' consumption of meat. So it's, and there is no real anthropological evidence anywhere where there's a sustained sort of vegan diet. It's just not possible. And so now when you look at like the empirical evidence in anthropology and evolutionary biology, it's the diet. Meat is a fundamental. It's just fundamental to our nutrition. And so just going to your point on Carl Jung. So the thought came about that you just see so much vegan rhetoric, which is very, very hostile. So there's this like, yeah,
I can witness that.
there's a strange, I don't like dichotomy in their logic, well, in their personalities, for example, that at the front they proclaim themselves to be morally superior to a meat eater, that they are doing the ethical thing by not killing an animal. However, if you taking that point, you have a look at like Carl Jung, and then you're taking this concept of the shadow, and that I just thought to myself that everybody has, you know, both, I guess, the good and the evil there's within them. And so every vegan, if they were starving in a desert, would eat meat. And if they were, say, you know, and they would probably go to the extremes of consuming like other human beings if they were that hungry. So I just know if say, excuse my French, if shit hit the fan and they were starving, they would eat meat. So I just kind of thought, right, call the bullshit on that. And then what is happening here is that they are just unable to face their shadow, so that they have not confronted the shadow that they can commit evil. So it's actually a type of cowardice. So instead of saying, look, I can kill an animal, if they just kind of bury that emotionally, and then they project out moral, ethical standards such as I'm ethically more superior because I don't eat meat. Whereas if you compare this, but then on the other side, they get very angry when anybody tries to confront them, or even if one of their own, you know, goes awry and comes back to the meat eating side. So I just thought it was quite funny psychologically how you see this within the vegan community. Whereas if you compare this against hunters, for example, I feel like they themselves have integrated their shadow quite well, because you see the way in which they talk about meat and the way in which their thought process before they go about killing an animal, it's very, I guess I would say it's like very religious.
Absolutely.
You know,
Almost spiritual, I would say.
yeah, spiritual, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this in their personality, and whereas you see it, there's a lot of anger and emotion coming out of say vegans when they speak about vegan diets, but when you talk to a hunter, they're very much more cool, calm, and collected. And they speak about everything quite rationally. And they speak very much in regards to their emotions, themselves, their personality, and how that is going forth and connecting with the animal. And then the process, not just prior to killing, the killing, and then also, say, it comes to butchering the animal afterwards, and then processing the meat and everything. And there, I would say there's a full connection. be it a life cycle that, they have confronted their shadow. Yes, I can kill. I need to kill to get meat. Meat is good for optimal health. But how do I rationally appeal to this, that I'm not some evil person killing an animal? Is in fact, well, I need to look at the spiritual aspects of this and see how that this animal has lived a good life. It has consumed its nutrition, which I'm now going to pass to myself and my other friends by spreading the meat. And you get this sort of like quite spiritual cycle of life that comes with, I guess, with hunters and as, I guess, meat eaters. But that would, I guess, the other
Yeah,
issue
no,
is if that makes sense.
it does. I think it
Yeah.
does, and I think having experienced both spectrum, really coming from a background of being a vegetarian and a vegan for so many years in total, I feel that it's almost a beautiful experience to go on that journey and to accept to go fishing or to go hunting and to connect in a very deep and meaningful way with that animal and to be deeply grateful for that life. And I find that now that I've gone fishing trips with my dad and we learn how to put back into the sea the little fish that is too small to be eaten and that needs to keep growing. We do it with a mindset that is genuinely respectful, I feel. And some may say, oh, but you are killing this fish. Yes, which I am going to consume, and that will be my meal, and there will be no plastic consumption. There will be no or minimum environmental impact because I won't be getting something that has been shipped from the other side of the planet and wrapped in all sorts of toxin and then filled in with all sorts of colorants or conservative. So I think that, as you say, it does have a spiritual element to it, and emotionally can be tough. I am also an absolute animal lover, and I find that a lot of the reason why I was a vegetarian was for so long was because I was affected by those pro-vegan or pro-vegetarian videos. Nobody wants to see an animal suffer or an animal being killed. I can acknowledge that. But if we think about our evolution as human beings and we go back to how we became the human that we are, it is just undeniable. The reason our brains are the size that they are is because of fire and our capacity and ability to cook the meat that we did on fire, meat or fish. If we hadn't cooked the way we did, we wouldn't be the humans that we are. So I find that if we just sit back for a moment, go back into a more rational mindset, let go of the emotion and just look at science, look at evolution, then we are faced with a reality that is going back to a diet. It's not even a diet. I think it's a lifestyle. I think a primal carnivore is a lifestyle. It's a way of being, and it's actually more natural. And that's the other thing I wanted to talk about tonight, is how a lot of the food that we're consuming is so far removed from nature, from the source. And not only is it far removed materially, also spiritually, and it really disconnects us further and further away from the food. And there is this idea now that low fat is good, and then instead of the fat, the products are filled with grains and sugar. And I really want to talk about this fat and sugar concept, and I would love to have your thought, because when we think about it in nature, other than honey and a few berries and the fructose, the sugar from fruit, and of course the sugar cane, but that came in very small quantities, we were not designed to be eating that refined sugar, the sugar that we find in all the sweets, in all the drinks. But it's not just that, it's all the hidden sugar in the form of refined carbs that I find are really, really dangerous, because they're everywhere. They're in the bread, they're in the pasta, they're in the pizza. And going back to a primal carnivore diet can really help, I think, everyone go into a mindset of asking yourself the question, right, is this natural or is this completely man-made, processed, industrialized? And how far removed from nature is it? Like, how many steps did it take for that food to come into my plate? And so what's your thoughts here about the importance of fat, and also how we how I think we have a misconception about fat. I know that when I tell people that I put, butter in my coffee, or that I cook my steak or spread my steak in butter, they just jump up and down. But I have a very high fat diet and I feel super healthy, and I don't think that fat makes you fat. And I would love your thoughts on that.
So I totally agree with that. Fat doesn't make you fat. The reason why this, I guess, the low fat diet is because there was, I guess, there was a study put out, I think, back in the 70s or the 80s, which found cardiovascular heart disease. However, based on somewhat dubious science, in all honesty, and not really replicated efficiently throughout the decades, and is now recently, it's where this is starting to, I guess, come to light within the scientific community. So fat doesn't make you fat. What will make you fat is excess calories. However, so there's a double-edged sword to fat. So fat per gram has 9 calories, whereas carbohydrates and proteins have 4 grams per calories, 4 calories per gram. So the issue is here that technically per gram, fat is technically more fattening, while it's calorically higher. But but that doesn't make it necessarily bad, because if you're consuming, calories within your allowance, within your physiological allowance, then it's not going to make you fat. And then it's also that I'd say that fat actually has a lot of health benefits. It has been demonized for a very long time, but it's actually it actually has a lot of health benefits. Such as, it's essential for hormonal regulation. And as you alluded to earlier on, when you said, I felt that my skin is better in the sun. Now, I would say that is the same with me, that consuming a sort of high saturated fat diet, I have found that my skin performs a lot better in the sun. And this is against a high consumption of polyunsaturated fatty acids. Yes. And the reason why polyunsaturated fatty acids is, if you think about a very strong molecular structure, so it's a very uniform, strong building block. Whereas a polyunsaturated fatty acid, it has a kink, it like goes in a C shape.
So I'm just going to pause you here for a moment.
No problem.
Doesn't know the difference between all those fats. So for you guys that are listening, if it's the first time you're being introduced to the different fat concept, so there is saturated fat, there is monounsaturated fat, and then there is polyunsaturated fat, also called true fats. Those guys you don't want to have. They're the first one to eliminate out of the pantry. There will be your canola oil, soybeans, basically sunflower oil, all those industrial long shelf oil. If you want to ask yourself whether an oil is good or bad for you, first of all, if it has a very long shelf life, probably not, unless it is olive oil or coconut oil. And then with saturated fat, the first category, they go hard when they're cold. So think of butter, for example, or lard. That's how you know this is a saturated fat, which is the good fat. And just tapping into what you said about how important it is for our hormones, I love that you said that, because I find that a lot of people do forget that hormones are made from fat. So if we have a fat-free diet, our hormones are suffering. By the same token, our brain is 50% fat. Our brain is made out of fat, cholesterol, and every single cell in our body, our cell membrane, are made out of fat. So that's another thing that I feel, the sort of fat-free diet are dangerous for our health, because they take away the good fat, and they don't distinguish between good fat and bad fat, and they put people in this sort of fat phobia, which I've really noticed with my clients. When I talk fat, I feel like I'm almost using a bad word, we should reinvent a new word for fat so that it has a positive connotation in people's psyche. But really, it's important to pause here for a moment and think about, our body composition, our cell membrane, our hormones, all made out of fat, and also how, there is within that range of fat, good fat and bad fat, because the body composition, our body composition, will directly reflect the type of fat that you're taking. So if you're eating fat, even good fat, from an animal that has itself consumed bad fat, then you will also be consuming bad fat. So what I mean by that, and I find that this is perhaps not talked about enough, if you're consuming a cow, so you're going to eat a steak, but that cow is going to be from a farm that's been grain fed, which is not natural. Cows don't really eat grains in the natural way of being. Or if you eat a fish that's also been fed grain, then you're going to end up consuming fats that will be high in omega-6, which come from the grain and the seeds, but will be fairly poor in omega-3, which comes from the grass and the plankton, which is what natural feeding process for animals would be. So that ends up in a situation where our society is currently, I would say, overfed, but massively undernourished, because their ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 is completely has gotten really wrong. I read studies that in our paleo ways as ancestors, our ratio was 1 omega-3 for 1 omega-6, and now we have 1 omega-3 for 50 omega-6 ratio.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's those ratios over the long term over the long term of your life, which are going to cause, I guess, like serious negative effects to your to longevity, to potential risks for metabolic diseases, those kind of things. And I think that's why we need to get kind of clear on what role does fat play in your body, and how I think like the higher consumption of saturated fats, which I would argue is probably better over the long run, simply down to they're less likely to be oxidized, for example. So I think that's one of the big issues about the polyunsaturated fatty acids. It's okay. I mean, there might be a lot of health benefits to those oils, like if you test those, I guess, like in vitro or in a lab. But those oils get oxidized very easily when exposed to heat and also light. And now you have to take in the fact that there's a long time that goes from processing those oils from seed to it being bottled and you buying in the shop, whereby the chances are that they have not been stored correctly. They're in like opaque bottles, and therefore the oil that you're consuming is going to be oxidized. Now, when you're consuming oxidized oils, what you're basically doing is your body is trying to build a uniform house out of uniform bricks. Okay, and it needs perfectly uniform, well, it wants uniform bricks for each block it lays, right? So if you've got perfect skin, unblemished skin, young skin, you have very uniform blocks of collagen being laid. However, if you start feeding your body rancid oxidized oils, what you're doing is you're giving your body malformed building blocks. So instead of getting a uniform brick, you're getting bricks of all different shapes and sizes, and then your body's then has to lay those as the foundation to build skin. And then obviously you're going to have an asymmetrical structure built versus a symmetrical structure if you were building out of sort of healthy unoxidized oils. I think that's fundamentally a big issue about oils and the consumption of that. And when you start to talk about, and then this also then builds when you get a high amount of you get this sort of these oxidative issues, they then cause other chemical reactions, such as, I guess that's where you get the terms of inflammation and oxidative stress and reactive oxygen species and these types of.
And then interestingly, we're going to blame fat. We're going to blame fat and we're going to say, hey, fat is the bad guy, but we're going to completely forget to go one step back and think, not just fat, which fat are we talking about? Because yes, polyunsaturated fats are bad, but I feel that we put all the fats in the same bag and we blame them all together. Whereas
Yeah.
it's really not as simple as that. You have to separate your fat from your fat and really get to know your fats. So
I mean, I really agree with that. And I think this has been, I think what the carnivore diet and the whole movement of the paleo movement and the ancestral food movement has done is like they've kind of stripped back a lot of, they're trying to strip back, I think, a lot of the marketing that goes on with a lot of nutrition since, say, the 60s. And if you have a look, you know, is it is it a coincidence that, you know, this sort of standard Western diet, okay, has become popularized since the 60s, and that it is also corresponded with a lot of, I guess, industrial food manufacturing interests. And I think what's happening now is there's a lot of the carnivore, paleo, primal, ancestral movement is kind of going back and looking at those sort of foundational scientific studies of the 60s, 70s, and 80s that have sort of dictated the nutritional policy since then, and actually saying, well, actually, these are based on, you know, what is actually quite dubious science. And since we're getting so much anecdotal evidence to the contrary, maybe we need to start properly questioning this. And, you know, for example, if you, I think one of like the Harvard, like some like controversial Harvard nutritionist called Frederick J. Stair, who kind of, you know, really popularized the standard American diet and kind of, you know, basically would say, hey, like drinking Coke is actually a healthy part of a diet. You know, this kind of, you can consume industrialized food and, you know, still be, yes, you could do it if it was all in balance, but with those types of foods, it's so easy to overconsume. And this is what we've seen, is you've just got such calorie dense foods that are readily available and very cheap that people just easily easily overconsume. And
yes,
you
yes,
know,
yes.
and this is the issue. But why, you know, when presented with especially a lot of anecdotal evidence to sort of an ancestral based diet of meat, why you don't see this getting picked up, I think, is a lot to do with invested interests within the industrialized food manufacturing industry. Because what you can't do is you can't really package meat. You can't really market meat. You can't make meat readily available. You can't put it in little packages that can sit on, that has really long shelf life, that you can put in all different colors. You can put like, you know, all the little characters that you see on cereal boxes. You can't come up with all this and that. This is what, this is what industrialized food, especially if you have a look at, say, breakfast bars, you know, nutritional bars, nut bars, basically all. Like, if you have a look at like a lot of like the vegan snack food,
Yes. And
this is all long shelf life, high margin food, which corporations and marketing agencies absolutely love, and supermarkets absolutely love, because they make them a lot of money.
well, and your point about long shelf life also goes hand in hand with the point about the type of fat that is being injected in this product. Because if we think back about the different three types of fat, we know that saturated fat, especially saturated fat with high level of omega-3, they're going to oxidize, they're going to go off very quickly. So if you have your wild caught fish or your grass-fed beef and you leave it out on the counter, it's gonna go bad quickly. That's the saturated fat. That's the omega-3. That's gonna go bad quickly. Now, the more you go into high omega-6 content and polyunsaturated fat, the longer the shelf life will be. So that's why you see that all those cereals bar, all those processed frozen meals, all those lunch, the worst that I can see or think of are those pre-made lunches that are so-called chicken rice or whatever, and they actually can stay out of the fridge for weeks or maybe years. You look at the date at the bottom and it says, you know, good until March 2022.
Yeah.
And then you look at the ingredient list and you literally need to be a certified biologist or scientist or have studied chemistry to understand what this food is made out of. And that is not food. That is a mixture of you know, high and saturated trans fat, polyunsaturated trans fat, and that's just not, that's gonna give you a quick fix, and that's the danger as well with quick fix. And I think there is maybe an analogy in life within that, not wanting to get too philosophical, but I find that quick fix in food go in the same kind of path as quick fix in health. I don't think there is a quick fix when it comes to health. It does take time to understand your food, to do the research, to learn what you need to learn, to walk the walk, and to really clean out your kitchen, to go and buy the right thing, to cook the right thing, to spend time in your kitchen. Of course, the quickest way is go and grab this plastic wrapped filled with, you know, toxic and toxins. But that's the thing. Do you want to go fast or do you want to go long?
Well, exactly. And if it is one of those process, it is that process that you need to really integrate this into a lifestyle. It's not,
Of course.
and that I guess that is the sell of the sort of modern Western diet, is that it is a quick fit. It is easy. I mean, you don't have to give it much thought. You can just turn up to a shop, you can buy a packet, your ready-made meal, you can consume it, you can keep going, but you're somewhat kind of, I'd say, you're kind of detached from life. You're kind of detached from something that is fundamentally very, very important for your longevity and your well-being. And yes, you might be fine now, but you know, you really need to think about your health in the long term, because you'll just become more susceptible to, you know, negative health outcomes as you age, and especially so if what you're continually eating over that time is poor nutrition. And
Yes.
yeah, I think so. It's a fundamental. You do need a mind shift, and you do need a lifestyle shift to really, when it comes to really getting your nutrition in line. Because as you say, if say you're around about, you know, if you're around about 30 and you're just thinking, you know what, I actually need to start improving my diet, you know, you've got like 30 years of ingrained patterned behavior, which you're not going to fix overnight. So, you know, there's a lot that needs to go into changing and building better habits. And that is, you know, it's going to have to involve things like, you know, psychological, I guess, counseling, nutritional counseling, you know, fitness counseling, those kind of things. So I think that's why you do need to view it as a lifestyle change because of all those factors.
Yes, and I think in that sense, it does really encompass taking time and also, as you said earlier, developing that connectedness with food, but also becoming more respectful. As a meat eater, for example, I've adopted this nose to tail philosophy whereby if I'm gonna eat a steak that I'm gonna get from the butcher, I'm not just gonna eat the prime cuts. I'm also gonna get everything, and I'll cook all the bits, the tendons, the tails, and I'm gonna use the bones and make bone broth, which would be amazing for collagen. I'm also gonna use the organ, and actually, this is, you know, this is a true superpower food. If you think kale is a miracle, actually kidney and heart are probably the superfood. So
Yeah.
just yes, I think there is a bit of a, but again, there is this kind of reluctance to accept what was always there. So again, thinking back for a moment of our times as hunters gatherers, when men used to go for hunts and they would have gone days out of the tribe, we know for a fact that the first thing that they would go for would be the organ meat, because they're nutrient rich food that you can get. And we can see that in the animal realm. You know, the bear will go for the salmon roe before eating the salmon. The lion will go for the offals of the prey before eating the muscle. And we have this reaction that is very emotional towards eating organ meat. But what if we thought for a moment, well, we've killed that cow. We're going to eat the ribeye. We're going to eat the filet mignon. And that cow is not dead anyway, so why is it cringeworthy to eat the tail and drink the bones? It's actually more respectful to the animal that has died anyway to eat everything. And I would love to know, what are your 5 top organ meat go-to, or 5 top 3? What would you say? And I know we have conversation about faux.
If you're asking for my personal preference,
Yes.
or if you're asking for what nutritionally is the best to go for.
Well, let's bear in mind we have about 10 minutes left. So how about you do a bit of
Okay.
half and half?
Half
Let's
is
talk
probably going to be
organ meat for a moment.
Yeah, okay. So liver is going to be the one that you want to eat. However, liver, if you take, say, cow's liver or lamb's liver, it tends to be the one that has the most intense flavor. So it can be a little difficult to adjust to. You know, that nutritionally pound for pound is like pretty bloody good. So, however, there are other, I guess, organ meats that are just more palatable on first try. Probably the easiest, in my opinion, would be chicken liver. It is very easy. Actually, has quite a nice flavor. Again, kidneys aren't as intense, and again, they're like nutritional powerhouses. But my personal preference for offal is, I'm a massive fan of tripe, which is intestine. I absolutely love
Very
it. I have done even. Sorry?
Very popular in France.
Oh, it is. Yeah. What's it? Tripe à la lyonnaise. So anyway, à la Provence. Anyway, it was. I absolutely. There we go. So I used to love that. Absolutely love tripe. What I've been eating loads of recently, which I absolutely love and first had in a Vietnamese pho, is beef tendon. So if you can get to an Asian butcher and buy beef tendon, it is incredible. It's one, you slow cook it for an hour, or in a pressure cooker anyway, for an hour, and it comes out, it just has this like gelatinous, thick texture. It's absolutely delicious.
Yes,
And
you're making my mouth water.
Yeah, it is. It's making my mouth water right now. But it's very, like, its macros are incredible. It's just very high in protein. And then you're getting all the like collagen straight from the collagen. Like, so, you know, in regards to supporting, you know, do you need an expensive collagen supplement if you can just eat some beef tendon, which is very cheap? I'd say that. And then again, chicken, as I mentioned, chicken liver is another favorite organ meat. And if you can get it, beef heart. Beef heart is actually fantastic. You can just cut it up into thin slices, marinate it, and then just fry it. And it actually tastes delicious.
You know, one of my most recent discovery, and I have my mom to thank for that, is tongue, beef tongue.
Oh yeah, forgot about that. Yeah.
Delicious. And I'm gonna actually, and it's slow cooked, and it's very tender.
Yeah.
It's very good. I love this conversation, and you know, for those of you that are listening that are just of eating the organ meat directly, there are a lot of great. We feel that it's also a mindset. Amazing that it really is the superfood. If you've had that animal anyway, and you're going to consume the best, more of a 360 overview of the animal as a whole, and see the carcass, the way of really fully connecting with their life. Okay, I'm not very hungry. I want to go make myself
Yeah,
some bone broth and liver with French mustard and all of that. Right, this has been amazing. Guys, for all of those that didn't note it down at the very beginning, go and have a look at letseatmeat.com. It's the new blog that's been released. Amazing source of information. I hope you enjoyed this live. If there is any question that follows up, we'll be more than happy to answer. And yes, go and unleash your inner lion. Great. Have a good night, everybody. Speak soon.
Speak soon. See ya.